It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying. By rayrae118. Chapter 19. Harry blinked and then blinked again. He looked around, seeing all the eyes on him, and swallowed. Harry Potter! Dumbledore called again, also looking in his direction. He turned to Ginny, his eyes pleading. Ginny nodded, understanding. I know you didn't do it, Harry, she said, her voice wavering as the implications began making themselves known on her. Hermione and Neville looked worried as Harry turned towards them, stating calmly and surely, I didn't enter myself. They nodded, believing him, as Dumbledore called to him for a third time. Ron didn't say anything, but he had a somewhat hostile look on his face, with the dread settling in his stomach and making him regret eating so much. Harry slowly made his way towards the door that the other champions had disappeared behind. He looked at Dumbledore, was partially accusing, partly searching. Wasn't it the headmaster's responsibility to make sure this didn't happen? What if this was just another one of his tests? What if he hadn't had that dream about Voldemort? He may have seriously considered that line of thought. He heard some muttering from the room as the door closed, though it wasn't from as many people as he would have thought. Unbeknownst to him, the members of the DA were quickly reassuring non-members that Harry Potter they had come to know over the last couple of months wouldn't have entered himself. He made a point of shooting down several wide-eyed first years when they asked if he wished he would compete, stating the dangers and his wish to live a long, healthy life. He had also impressed upon them how much he hated his fame. The three champions looked up as he entered. Fleur was the first to speak. Yes? Do they need us back for something? Sorry about the accent, by the way. I'm trying. Harry just shook his head numbly as the cavalry arrived behind him. Minerva immediately went to his side and gave him a reassuring one-armed hug. He looked at her, their conversation from the previous night coming to the forefront of his mind. She nodded her understanding. Ludo Bagman was positively beaming, even as Madame Maxine spluttered, What is the meaning of this, Dumbledore? I do not recall reading in the rules that the host school gets 2 champions. Fleur and Victor and Cedric all looked at Harry. Fleur and Victor with suspicion and Cedric with worry. What do you mean? Victor asked, his brow furrowed. Ludo Bagman was bouncing on his toes now. An unprecedented surprise indeed, he grinned. It would seem that Mr. Potter is our 4th champion. Minerva shook her head. Surely there is a way out of this. Harry didn't enter himself. How can he be bound to compete? Snape sneered. Of course he entered himself. Just like his father, arrogant down to the last. Be quiet, Severus. Minerva snapped, causing both Harry and Cedric to smile, looking at each other in amusement as the Transfiguration Professor cut off the potions master. If you weren't so set on your petty revenge, you would be able to see what's right before your eyes. She turned to Dumbledore. Wasn't your job to make sure this didn't happen? Where were your protections? Dumbledore had no wish to be on the wrong side of a maternal Minerva, so he just focused on Harry. Harry, did you enter your name? Harry shook his head. Did you ask an older student to do it for you? Harry shook his head again, standing a little straighter as his eyes flashed. I already have all the fame I can stand, Professor, and I certainly have no need of more money. There was a definite bite to his words as his gaze shifted to the potions professor for a moment, before turning back to the headmaster. It is quite an interesting situation, Moody grunted, stepping forward. The goblet's a highly magical object, tricky to fool. Nothing a 4th year would be able to do, no matter how advanced he may be. A strong confundus may work, perhaps, to trick it into thinking of 4th school competing. His magical eye whirled in every direction. The fact that he has been entered suggests a more nefarious purpose here. Someone probably wants Potter harmed and sees this tournament as a way to make it happen. Harry's mind went back to the threat he had received from Malfoy at the World Cup that summer. There was no doubt in his mind in that instant that Voldemort was gaining strength. The professors turned to Crouch, who had remained silent up to this point. I'm afraid the rules are binding. As of this moment, Mr. Potter is our 4th champion. Ludo clapped his hands. Well then, the first task will take place on the 24th of November. and you will be having a test of your daring and courage. As such, you will not be told what the task will entail until the morning of. You will be allowed nothing but your wand. The gathering broke up after that, with Minerva leading Cedric and Harry through the now empty Great Hall. When they reached the point where Cedric would turn left for the Hufflepuff common room, he stopped and turned to face Harry. "I believe you, Harry," he told the younger boy. "From what I've learned in the last few months, you're not a liar. If you said you didn't do it, you didn't. I'll make sure my housemates know that too." Harry nodded gratefully. He had known that Susan would stand beside him, but he hadn't been sure about the rest of the house. "Thanks, Cedric," he replied. Minerva smiled, bidding the prefect good night with a parting, 5 points to Hufflepuff, Mr. Diggory, for showing true loyalty. Cedric grinned and waved at the two before disappearing down the hall. Minerva led him up to the fat lady's portrait with a parting hug and a promise to inform Sirius and Remus of the situation. Harry took a deep breath and steeled himself to enter the common room. There was less noise coming from the room than he had expected, but the reason made it perfectly clear when he cleared the portrait hall and saw Ginny talking to her brothers to task for actually thinking Harry would have entered himself. Fred and George looked properly chastised, and Harry could not but smile slightly at the sight. Ron was standing off to the side, looking bemused, but there were traces of guilt in his expression that hinted to Harry he might have said something about him competing in the tournament, and had been reamed out by Ginny as well. Hermione was the first to notice him, and her squeal drew all their attention. People started to clap and cheer, but Harry held up one hand, the one that wasn't currently being crushed by Hermione's hug, and told them what he had told the professors and other champions. "I didn't enter my name," he implored, his bright green eyes even more piercing now they were unhidden by glasses. "I don't need any more fame or fortune. And I really don't want to do this. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like I have any point. And it doesn't matter that I didn't enter myself. Just the fact I was chosen means I am magically bound to compete. I thank you all for your support. I promise to do my utmost not to get anyone killed." There was some scattered laughter, and fortunately it seemed like most of them actually believed him. He suspected the efforts he had been making this year to actually get to know his peers had helped. He met Ginny's gaze and jerked his eyes upwards as his free hand held up one finger covertly. She nodded, and he carefully extracted himself from Hermione, promising her they would talk more tomorrow before he went up to bed. The gathering in the common room broke up soon after, and Seamus and Dean entered their dormitory first, assuring Harry that they believed him, but confided that they would be rooting for him. Harry nodded, relieved. The two had joined the DA a few weeks earlier, and Dean had come to Harry a few days later, almost thanking him on bended knee as he explained he had received his first ever E in Transfiguration, thanks to the study group. Harry was proud of his dormmate. Dean was a nice guy, but he and Seamus were not what you would call studious. An E was a huge deal. Normally those two tended an average of A's across the board. Neville and Ron entered next and didn't say much to their friend, knowing that they would all get together and talk tomorrow. The other four quickly fell asleep, but Harry couldn't. His mind was too overloaded. So he just lay there, thinking until 1 o'clock, when he quickly and quietly got up and headed down to the common room. Ginny was waiting for him, as arranged. She wasted no time in jumping up and giving him a big hug, clinging to him as if he might vanish at any moment. Harry carefully led her over to the sofa and nearest to the dying fire, and waited until she was calm enough to let go. "Oh, Harry, I'm so scared for you. What did the professors say?" Harry grimaced. "Well, the visiting professors are furious. They seem to think we were trying to cheat. Snape, of course, didn't believe me, blaming it on my arrogance." Ginny growled. Dumbledore didn't really say much, but I got the impression he was trying not to appear too partial to any side. Aunt Minerva was definitely defending me. You should have seen her shut Snape up. And Moody thinks that someone entered my name to try and get me killed. Ginny gasped but stifled her reaction quickly. She reached for his hand and held on tightly. Harry quieted her by resting one finger on her lips. His eyes were kind, and there was a slight smile as he reassured her. Gin, when have you ever known me to give up? We'll keep practicing with you and Hermione watching my back. How could I lose? Ginny smiled, but she didn't try to speak. Harry lowered his hand and she leaned into him, pulling her feet up onto the sofa and curling them underneath her as she snuggled into his side. Harry, for his part, lifted his arm to give her space, and then lowered it across her back. He began rubbing small circles subconsciously, and Ginny let out a sigh in satisfaction. After a few moments, they just sat there contentedly, before Ginny stood up. Harry let out a questioning sound, indicating that he was listening. Ginny paused, unsure of how to continue, but she forced herself to speak. Did you really mean what you said to my brothers this summer? Harry shifted so he could look at her. As he thought back to that conversation he had had in the sitting room of the Burrow the day before the Quidditch World Cup, Ginny's worried brown eyes stared back at him. He smiled. I can't really explain why, Gin, but somehow you and I, we just fit. I know we're young, but why does it feel so right to be with you? Why do you fit so perfectly into my arms? Ginny blushed, but she couldn't help but smile. What happens now? She asked. Harry lifted one shoulder in a half shrug. I'm not really sure, he admitted. The tournament's going to put a big spotlight on me. Are you sure you want to be a part of that? Ginny sat up sharply. Harry James Potter, she growled. If you think I would ever abandon you just because of a little extra attention, she began, but was cut off quickly by a rather surprising source. Harry's mouth closed on hers, and suddenly she couldn't really think. Her lips moulded to his, and she felt herself kissing him back. She suddenly realised what people meant when they talked about fireworks going off. The ones in her mind were closer to Fred and George's impressive displays. Harry pulled back after a few moments, looking uncertain. You almost looked like you wanted to apologise, but didn't get a chance, when Ginny leaned forward, going in for another kiss. It was still just as chaste, but something happened between the two. Ginny felt something within her respond to Harry's presence, and somehow she knew it was her magic. They separated this time. Harry looked slightly dazed. Did you feel that? He asked curiously. Ginny pondered what she had experienced. Like a pulling in my chest. Harry nodded. Ginny sat back a little more, and felt something even more powerful. She looked down at Harry's chest, then back at his face. Does it feel like there's some kind of link between us? Harry nodded slowly, touching his own chest, and then reaching out his left hand to hover in front of hers. He could almost see it, like a thick rope that linked their chests, their hearts. His eyes widened as he stared at Ginny. Did she see it too? Ginny was too busy watching him, but when he seemed to be touching something in thin air, she looked down. There was a slight shimmer that looked almost like a golden rope, hanging in the air between them. Harry, she whispered, awestruck. Harry reached out to grasp her hand, and she gasped. Where there had been just a shimmer before, a mere suggestion, now she could see a defined rope, golden, braided and secure. No, see wasn't right. She could sense it. It was definitely there, but it wasn't something anyone else would be able to feel. They studied this new development for a while longer, until a noise from above drew their attention back to the present. Harry stood up and offered Ginny his hand, which she took gratefully, and didn't let go until they were at the stairway, leading off to the different dormitories. Harry leaned down and gave Ginny a last good-night kiss, and watched as she ascended the stairways, noting with interest that the strange rope between them stretched a bit, thinning slightly, but didn't vanish. When she had disappeared into her dormitory, he finally returned to his. Sleep came much easier this time around. The next day was both a trial and much easier than he could have expected. Harry met Ginny in the common room before breakfast and was able to give her a good morning kiss before the rest of their friends showed up. Hermione looked at them, assessing, but fortunately neither Ron nor Neville seemed awake enough to notice anything. Cedric and Susan had apparently gotten all the Hufflepuffs the night before, and further give him their backing when the two of them approached Harry at breakfast and publicly announced their support. Cho and Luna were the next ones to find Harry, and as he and his friends sat down at the Gryffindor table, but also gave him their support and wished him luck. Harry was glad that Luna had become much more of a leader in Ravenclaw, and as such less prone to teasing than she would have been in her first 2 years. Cho had definitely taken her fellow leader under her wing, refusing to allow the ridicule of a fellow student to continue. With the position Luna now held, fewer students were actually inclined to be cruel to her. She still got an odd looks frequently, but not nearly as many, as certainly not as many from Ravenclaws were mocking her for her strange views. The Slytherins remained aloof, and he was definitely on the receiving end of a few glares, mostly from Malfoy and his cronies, but those whom he had gotten to know, Blaise and Daphne in most of the first and second years, some of the third years, and to a lesser extent Millicent and Tracy, gave him subtle nods. He nodded back, knowing they didn't want to do anything to distance themselves from their housemates. A Hogsmeade visit was announced for that Saturday, and Harry wasted no time in asking Ginny. He received a knowing look from Hermione, a bemused look from Ron, and a congratulatory grin from Neville. Susan caught up with them as they left the Great Hall, and Harry asked them to meet in the DA lounge after classes. They agreed and headed off in their separate directions. Susan to charms, Ginny to potions, and Neville, Harry, Ron and Hermione back to the common room for a free period before transfiguration. Shortly after 3 o'clock found all 6 students seated around one of the tables in the DA lounge. Once they were all there, Harry threw up some privacy awards, earning a look of approval from Hermione, before he began to explain in detail what had happened the previous night. Ron, Neville, Susan and Ginny all laughed at McGonagall chewing out Snape. Even Hermione cracked a smile. When he finished, Hermione leaned forward intently. Harry half expected her to take out a piece of parchment and start taking notes. What did Dumbledore do with all of this, Harry? Harry grimaced. Nothing. Ginny also made a growling noise. He stood back and watched as the professors accused me and suggested that someone was trying to get me killed. Mr. Crouch said I had no choice but to compete, and he just did nothing. Ginny's next comment would have certainly gotten her mouth rinsed out with soap had her mother been present. As it was, the current company just looked impressed. Harry chuckled. You've been hanging out with Fred and George too much, he commented. Ginny blushed a little. Actually, Bill taught me that one, she admitted, smiling back. Susan leant forward. Harry, you should tell my aunt. She should know what's going on. Harry nodded. Aunt Minerva said she would tell Sirius and Remus, so I'm going to guess Amelia will know by the end of the day. The two shared a knowing grin. Sirius and Amelia had only gotten closer the last couple of months, and Harry was starting to expect they would soon be hearing about Sirius moving out of McGonagall Castle and into the Bones estate. He wondered where that would leave him, should Sirius move. He loved living with Aunt Minerva, but he wanted to live with his godfather as well. The 6 friends spent the next couple of hours discussing the situation, putting together a plan to help Harry with the significant disadvantages he found himself with. Hermione's schedule was methodical and would cover most of the most important hexes, jinxes, charms, transfigurations, and defensive spells from 4th and 5th year. They would move on to 6th year if they finished, but Harry wasn't sure if it was quite a comprehensive list. As they were packing up to head to dinner, Harry coughed, drawing their attention. He took Ginny's hand and looked at her questioningly. She seemed confused for only a moment before she smiled in understanding and nodded. Harry turned back to the other 4 students and shuffled his feet slightly. Ginny and I wanted to tell you. Ginny sighed and shook her head exasperatedly. What Harry is trying to say is that last night we finally stopped dancing around the issue and addressed it. We're dating, and we hope you're happy for us. Hermione and Susan immediately hugged the two of them, and Neville expressed his own congratulations with a handshake. Ron grunted and stepped forward. I already said that I'm all right with it, he said, looking between the two. It will probably take some getting used to, but I guess it had to be anyone, Harry. As good as anyone as you could ever get. Ginny smiled and Harry smirked. Was that a compliment? He asked, looking between his best friend and his girlfriend. Ron shrugged and stuck out his hand. Congrats, mate. Harry shook it gratefully as the six made their way to the Great Hall. Just before entering, Neville stopped and pulled Susan back with him. Stuttering, he asked, Susan, I was wondering, would you be interested in going to Hogsmeade with me this weekend? Susan smiled brilliantly. I'd love to, Neville, she replied, beaming. Neville grinned, relieved, and they separated for dinner. End of chapter 19. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Harry and Ginny finally getting together. Whoop whoop, my OTB, Potters and Redheads. Yes! Remember to like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new chapter. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. See you next chapter. Bye!